Hello, this is Alasdair Post-Quinn from Fallingblox Designs. You can find me at double-knitting.com. This is the 4th episode of the Fallingblog Podcast. And as usual, we're going to start off with the Fallingblox Report. Just a little time for me to report on something that's going on in my knitting life. And the first thing that I want to report on is a thank you to a sample knitter named Megan, who finished this lovely piece in the back. This is the Kazaguruma shawl. It was originally done for the Willow Yarns Colorwork Club, and when I got the rights back to the pattern, I didn't get the actual sample back, nor rights to use the photos, so we had to do another one. Fortunately, the yarn is still available, and I was able to get it to my sample knitter, and several months later, voila! Fortunately, the pattern is already out, so if you're interested in it, you are welcome to go check it out on Ravelry. The photos will get updated as soon as I'm able to get a model and take photos again. Thanks to the slow lifting of the pandemic, I think it may be possible for modeling gigs to happen again pretty soon. The other thing that I want to talk about is something that doesn't have as much visual interest, but you can follow along if you're interested in filling out one of my surveys at double-knitting.com/survey2021, and the link to that will, of course, be in the info below. The survey is something that I did about a year ago when I was just starting to figure out what I was going to do for virtual knitting workshops. The results of that survey, of course, formed the basis for the building blocks series of workshops that I teach on my own, not through the big shows. And now that a year has gone by and I've had more experience with this, I'm also now thinking about expanding my repertoire of workshops, and I also want to get an idea of people's updated preferences on what kinds of workshops they're interested in being notified about when the workshop is scheduled. This new survey is basically a way for me to get all that info, and also some new info about other projects, things that I'm currently doing, things that I'm thinking about doing, getting ideas of people's attitudes on print books versus digital in this day and age, virtual workshops versus physical, and things like that. So it's completely optional, and I hope that you'll be interested enough in helping Fallingblox Designs grow and become more relevant that you'll take the 5 or 10 minutes that it might take to fill it out. So again, the URL is double-knitting.com/survey2021. The next segment of this podcast is going to be What's on My Needles. And what's on my needles right now is a piece of the upcoming wood hat for the Wuxing 5 Elements collection. And here it is. So this is going to be a really fascinating piece when it's finished. Obviously, this is just a little swatch. The swatch has 4 repeats of the pattern, and the pattern is actually fairly complicated. Obviously, you're not seeing 4 repeats of any single thing in here. We've got increases and decreases, slanting in different directions. We've got knot holes in different positions, or knots. A knot hole is what happens after the knot comes out. It's still in there, so it's just a knot. Anyway, the underlying theme here, of course, is the element of wood. So it's supposed to look like wood grain, and the way that I achieved that is to do a 3-color, so it's multicolor double knitting, 3-color stripe motif with the occasional knot. And what's really interesting about this pattern is that it has this semblance of randomness, but it's actually quite formulaic. And I want to talk a little bit about how this is created, and hopefully get your interest up for when it's actually released. The individual repeats are 18 pairs across, and each individual repeat is made up of 3 sort of subsections, and the subsections are 2 pairs, then 1 pair, then 2 pair, then 1 pair. But they also rotate in terms of color, so it goes light, dark, medium, light, dark, medium, light, dark, medium, light, dark, medium, that sort of thing. But because of the period of 2 in terms of shape and the period of 3 in terms of color, it ends up starting to look kind of random because your eye sort of loses track of the pattern. So then what I do is I start changing the pattern by moving a section, one of the 6 pair sections, diagonally across and letting this section spring back up on this side. It's not a cable, it's just increasing and decreasing. So that takes this and sort of reorganizes the 3 subsections. And so each of the first set is going to end up with the same starting point. But as the crossovers happen in different directions, the end point is going to end up different. So let's say that this is 1, 2, and 3, the 3 different subsections. That's how this section begins. That's how this section begins as well, because they're the same starting point. For this section, 1 and 2 switch, and 3 stays in the same place. So it becomes 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, like that. And then this one, the second and third switch, but the first stays in the same place, which means that you end up with 1, 3, 2. So the starting point for the next sections is going to be different. You're going to have a starting point of 2, 1, 3 and a starting point of 3, 1, 2, or 1, 3, 2. It's all very confusing, but it's easier understood when it's written down. So each starting point is going to have its own set of 6 possible charts. In that set of 6 charts, there are 2 possible endpoints, as well as 3 different locations for the knots. And taking 2 times 3, you get 6, and there we are. So the way that you're going to figure out which of the 6 to do is by rolling a die. And I'm going to recommend that you use a little schematic that I'm going to write out to plan this out ahead of time so that you don't have to roll the die every time you want to start a new section. It's going to be really kind of fascinating because every single hat is going to be different. Now, it's not nearly as crazily random as the 52 pickup scarf, which also uses a random algorithm of sorts by tossing a deck of cards in the air. This is going to be a lot simpler, just rolling dice every now and then. The crown decreases are going to end up with the same kind of situation, and I'm still working those out right now because this has many more repeats than your average hat. So the number of crown decreases is going to be larger than average, and I need to see what that's going to do with the crown. So more testing is needed. Speaking of testing, I am working on getting test knitters for this. I've just got one at the moment who's agreed to do it. If this is the sort of thing that you have expertise in, and it's relatively soon after I've posted this video, get in touch. I need people who are capable of multicolor double knitting and off-the-grid double knitting, and trying to get the tests done within the next couple of months so that I can get this pattern out by the fall. When it's done, by the way, that will be the last of the Wuxing 5 Elements collection. The final thing that I'm going to do with that collection is I'm going to compile the entire thing into a single PDF. Perhaps print it if people are interested in that. The patterns are never available as standalones anyway. They're all just part of the collection. So if you buy into the collection now, you'll get the 4 patterns that exist now, and you'll get this one when it comes out. And then shortly thereafter, they'll all be replaced by one single PDF. Now, the next segment in this podcast is going to be a pattern focus segment on the Victorian Raffia scarf, which you can see hanging right behind me. So my adventure with the Victorian Raffia started with my discovery of the work of Kieran Foley back in 2008 or 2009, I guess. I'm not sure exactly when. But the first thing that I ever did for it was, and this was probably one of the very few times you're going to see anything that is not double knitting on this podcast, but this was a piece that I did just following one of Kieran Foley's patterns. We were given quite a lot of leeway. This was for the Men's Spring Knitting Retreat back in 2009. We were going to be doing a sampler Afghan as a gift for the retreat center, I believe, and we were given quite a lot of leeway in terms of what to do. So this was what I did, and it is just a stranded knit piece, and I did it flat, which means that I had to strand both on the knit and the purl sides. But after doing this, it occurred to me that this would be a really great way to get more experience and practice doing double knit increases and decreases. So this piece, or this pattern, is called Scandinavian, and it is one of the more complicated things on Kieran Foley's website. And so I decided to take it, but not just use it as it was. As you can see, those rivers that flow through it have this sort of chevron effect throughout. I guess there's some increasing along the edges and decreasing along them in the middle. I decided I wanted to make it a little more complex. And so this is the pattern that I ended up working up. So this pattern, which eventually became known as the Victorian Raffia pattern, this little sample here, I want to point out a few things about it. First of all, if you look closely, you'll notice it's entirely done in twisted stitches. Second of all, the patterning goes all the way to the edge. There is no selve edge. And thirdly, and this is something you wouldn't immediately notice, there is a difference of, I think, 4 rows between the period of repeat of the river sections and the repeat of the sort of wallpaper-looking sections. I was working on it anyway, even though the pattern would not have been nearly as elegant. And I wrote to Kieran Foley because I was at the end of the process of writing my original book, Extreme Double Knitting, which I went to final edits in 2010. So I had figured out a lot of this, I'd done a lot of work on it, and I was about maybe 2/3 of the way through the scarf. And I wrote to Kieran and I said, hey, I'm writing a book on double knitting. I've been working on this scarf. I wondered if you would allow me to include it in the collection of patterns, with, of course, credit to you for the original design. And he wrote back tersely, no. I don't remember if there was a lot more to it, but basically no. He was not willing to let me do it. And this was, to some degree, a mixed blessing, because honestly, I didn't know if I would have the time to finish the piece, photograph it, etc., and then finally get it written up and into the book. So, I put it aside and worked on a lot of other things, and then maybe 5 years later, completely out of the blue, Kieran writes to me and says, actually, sure, let's do something together. I think perhaps it was simply that at the time when I initially asked him, I was a no-name designer with 2 or 3 patterns on Ravelry under my belt, and my book was still in progress, no way to know whether it was going to be a success. And then, of course, it turns out to be a success, and I had since become a much more influential, I suppose, designer, or at least well-known designer, and I think he decided that given that I had proven myself, it was worth it for him to suggest this again. So I pulled it out of storage, and I looked at it again, and I said, well, it's all in twisted stitches, and I'm not doing that anymore, especially for something that has so many double increases, which are awful to do in twisted stitches. It's got that issue where there's no selvage, so the edges are not nearly as clean as I could do now. And there's that weird thing about the period of the repeats being different. So I fixed it. I recharted it. I extended the floral pattern just a tiny bit. I gave it selvages. I gave it sort of mock ribbing things at the beginning and end, because of all of the increases and decreases that are happening right off the cast on. The cast on and eventual bind off edge are kind of distorted. So anyway, the eventual final version was this. So I did actually take that piece that was 2/3 done, and I ripped it all down to bare yarn again and started from scratch. And of course, it was 5 years old. It had been sitting in my closet. I wasn't deeply connected to it anymore, and I knew I would be happier with it if I just started from scratch. The one thing that I regret about this piece, and you can see it right there at the top where it folds, is that I hit purple at the same time at the in both yarns. And then there are also those places where you can see yellow and gray and green and gray. I could have been more careful about where I started so that those things wouldn't have happened, that the contrast would have remained all the way through the piece. But aside from that, it's still a huge draw. A lot of people see this and want to knit it, whether or not they are up for the challenge. I have had people do this as their first double knit project ever, which is kind of a shock to me. But, you know, if you're an adventurous knitter and you're already really good at increasing and decreasing, and you're willing to take the plunge, sure, go for it. More power to you. You'll learn a lot of things all at once. There are 14 different types of increase and decrease in this thing, counting the front and back separately, of course. And it's just a lot of practice. And when you're done with this, you will have a gorgeous piece, and you'll be really, really good at increasing and decreasing and double knitting. So the pattern for this is now available, has been available for some time, and it's available in print and in PDF. And if you buy the print version, you'll get a free PDF download. It's not like you can get it from anywhere except my website. So anything you buy from my website in physical form will come with a free PDF download, including, of course, this. And just to let you know, Kieran and I split the proceeds on this. So we're both getting paid for this, and it's a reasonable deal for both of us. So this has been the Victorian Raffia and its adventure through time. The next segment is going to be a little signal boost, and I wanted to try something a little different here. First of all, I'm going to highlight a yarn I'm excited about, and then I'm going to highlight a company that I want to boost a bit. I ran into Garthenor Organic at a Big Show's vendor area, virtual vendor area. I don't honestly remember if it was Stitches or Vogue, but it was a show where, rather than having a big vendor area, which we're all used to from going to physical shows, in the virtual shows, the vendors have time slots, and you sign into Zoom and watch their presentations, and oftentimes there's a coupon code or something like that. I saw Garthenor Organic in the listing, and I looked them up, and I found them really enticing. They are the first fully organic yarn company, formed in 1999 in the UK. They're really environmentally responsible. They have lovely yarn and lovely colors. And of course, there's no superwash to be found. It's definitely worth checking out. This is the pile of stuff that I got, or there's a little bit on either end that you can't see in the picture. So lots of different colors, and the yarn it's called Priscelli, and on the ball band it says organic Polworth, Romney, and Hebridean wool. Then on the back it says, grown in the Falkland Islands, South Wales, the Scottish Highlands, and southwest England, scoured, spun, and dyed in Yorkshire, and hand-finished in West Wales. It's a 4-ply fingering, and I have not worked with it yet. I am really looking forward to it. Also, every skein of yarn you buy, they plant a tree. And there's a specific organization they're working through with that, and I don't remember what it is, but check out their website for details. The next company that I want to point out is somebody who's been a good friend of mine for a long time, and who is doing some awesome things, and that is Lady Di. I wanted to do a signal boost for Lady Di from day one in this podcast. I reached out to her and I haven't heard anything back, and I know it's not personal. I'm sure she's just incredibly busy, given the way her business has been growing in the past decade or so. I've known her since really the beginning of her business, since before the beginning of her business. She is a friend from one of the first knitting groups that I really connected with, the Circles knitting group in Jamaica Plain near Boston. And Diane is and has been a real force for a lot of good things in the knitting world. This is Diane. She is also one of the very few BIPOC business owners in the yarn world. There are comparatively few folks of color in this industry. It's mostly us white folks, and I think that that in and of itself is worth signal boosting for, but she's also doing just some amazing things, not only for herself, but for BIPOC and other marginalized people's businesses in the craft world. So she's constantly doing collaborations and signal boosting other people herself, and oftentimes when she does shows at say Vogue Knitting Live, when she vends, she will bring in lots of friends and sell their stuff as well. She's actually done that for me, and I'm not even of the usual demographic that she supports, and I thank her for that. I've watched her and her business grow from something that she would carry around in a suitcase with dyed yarns and sell to friends, to this incredibly inspired, collaborative, activist, craftivist sort of collective at this point. And she's always taken for her colorways an interest in street art, and street art is also something that I collect photos of. And I managed to get this one while we were on a craft cruise up through the Maritimes in Canada. I don't remember which port of call this was in, but it may have been Halifax. And we were wandering around, and she saw this and went over to take a picture, as you would. So, and I got a picture of her taking a picture of it. So, as I said, LadyDieYarns.com, go check it out. She's constantly doing clubs and collaborations and amazing things, and of course her yarns are beautiful, so please do check her out. The final segment in this podcast is going to be a technique of the month, and this month's technique is going to be actually a series of techniques on troubleshooting your double knitting. I'm going to show you a few common mistakes and how to fix them. So the first thing that I'd like to show is actually a mistake that can't easily be fixed. But it's worth knowing about so that you can keep an eye out for the future. And that is the twist. So if you've done some double knitting before, you'll know that at the beginning of every row, you have to do a linked pair, which has you twist the yarns around each other between the knit and the purl, which gives you a link between your edge pairs or between your edge stitches without a color change. Now, that linked pair can be done elsewhere. It can be done in the work itself, or something very much like it can be done elsewhere in the work. And what that will do is it will link the fabric together, again, without a color change. But it will also give you a sort of color artifact. So normally what you should have between your stitches is a bar, just like you would in any single layer piece. But while that bar doesn't actually get removed, it can get obscured by a little bit of the other color getting wrapped around it, which is what happens when you do that twist. So you twist the two yarns around each other, and you end up with a functional link between the two layers, but also a little blip of the other color visible in between two of your stitches. And I've done another one over here. One of these is in between the knit and the purl, and the other is done between the purl and the knit, just to show the difference in the way they look, but they're still giving you this little blip of the other color. And they may be more visible on one layer than the other. As a matter of fact, on this layer, it's very visible, at least in this case. So you can see the other color wrapping around. So the next thing that I want to show you is something you actually can fix, and that's the bar. A bar happens when you don't bring both yarns together to the front or to the back. And this bar was actually created on the back of the work because this is in the flat, and so the last row that I did was facing like this, which means that the bar was created in a place where I can't see it. That's usually what happens, is that the bar is created in a place where you can't see it, and because you can't see it, you don't notice it until you get back around to it. Now, if you're doing double knitting in the round, you may never see it if you don't check your work every now and then. But flat, at least, when you're on your way back, you'll tend to see this bar, which is just this horizontal bit that covers over a knit. Now, this horizontal bit is supposed to be there. I actually mentioned that we have bars from stitch to stitch already. Those bars, of course, happen on this layer as well. But when that bar ends up wrapped around a stitch at the front of the work or on the other layer of the work, it's not supposed to be there. It's really just supposed to be on the other side of this stitch. So what we're going to do to fix that is, just to expedite this a little bit, I'm going to slip up to it rather than working up to it, because you don't actually need to use any yarn to do this. You just need to get to the point where the bar is. And then you reach underneath the bar, you grab the stitch that it's going over the top of, that it shouldn't be, and you sort of give it a tug to pull it underneath the bar. And then you let the part that's on the needle drop off the needle, and the stitch follows and comes to the front. So the bar is now at the back where it's supposed to be. The next one that I want to show you is a mistaken color change. And you'll notice that there are no color changes in this little swatch. It's all AB pairs on one layer and all BA pairs on the other layer. But there is one extra color change right here, where I went from AB to BA, or really I went from BA to AB because it was done on the other layer initially. So what I want to show you is how to switch this from BA to AB. Now, of course, you can do it in the opposite direction if need be. You simply can't do it if it's an AA pair or a BB pair. If you are seeing a pair where both stitches are the same color, you have too much of that color and not enough of the other color to properly fix that. So really, to fix that in the previous row, the only thing you can do is go back through the row, undo that pair, and redo it correctly. But if you have an AB pair that's supposed to be a BA pair or vice versa, it's easy to fix. So what I'm going to do is separate the two stitches of that one pair, which are now one on the right hand needle and one on the left hand needle. And then I'm going to take the left needle and I'm going to go underneath the left leg of the stitch on the right hand needle. Of the stitch one below the stitch on the right hand needle. So holding that on my left-hand needle, I'm going to drop the one that's on my right-hand needle, and then I'm going to pass the one that's held on my left over to the right. So that leaves me one loose floppy loop in the middle. Then I'm going to flip my work upside down a little bit, and I'm going to go into the corresponding loop on the left needle with my right needle. Grab that, drop the loop off my left needle, and then put this one that I was holding on my right back on the left. So I now have two loose loops on the needle, or between the needles, rather. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach underneath the front one, the one that was being used here, and I'm going to grab the back one and bring it to the front, like this. Note that it is seated forwards on the needle when you do this, so make sure it is seated forwards on the needle. And then you're going to grab the remaining loop with the left-hand needle. Note that the loop and its predecessor, already held on the needle, now match colors. And all I need to do at this point is pass the slip stitch over and off, and the same thing on the other side. And there's the pair again, now flipped from BA to AB. So these are some quick troubleshooting tips for double knitting, things that you might be likely to run into. There are certainly more advanced things to do with troubleshooting and double knitting, and if you are interested in more videos like this, definitely check out my YouTube channel. I'm going to be populating that with some technique videos pretty soon. And if you're interested in more advanced stuff, I don't know exactly what's coming up next yet, but check out my Patreon. I do have some advanced double knit videos up there, and there will be more in the near future. This has been Alasdair Post-Quinn for Fallingblox Designs. This has been the Fallingblog Podcast. I hope you found it interesting, educational, useful in some way, and I hope you'll stick around with me for the next one. I'm going to try to do this more often. You'll probably have noticed that this one's considerably later than I had hoped. The hope is that I'll be able to get more of these done more quickly, the more my technology is upgraded. So thank you again, and I will see you next time. Stay tuned.